eliminate the double coincidence of wants, then anything, any instrument that facilitate trade and exchange by a legal arrangement is money. And that's not true. Right? That's not true. For example, if one uses the variation model, one understands perfectly that in the variation model, the double coincidence of wants is overcome by something other than money. Right? By an accounting system that keeps debts and credits of each one and then clears them all when trade is completed. Right? That's how the variation system works. In the variation system, there is not the object we call money. Neither in the interpretation we discussed the other day of physical token that may or may not have real value, nor in the, let's call it mother, even if it is not really mother, interpretation of fiat, non-physical symbols, entity that have legal tender power. Okay? In the variation model, there is another legal device that says the contract between him and I about changing shoes for apples is enforceable and gets enforced. He gives me the shoes, I give him the apple, we auctioneer or somebody, some bookkeeper, make a note, then she trades with him, I trade with her, you trade with me, and at the end we make note every time, and then we clear. Right? And because we're all respecting the budget constraint, at the end there is no debit, credit. Everything is satisfied with equality. Right? And there is no need for money. Now obviously in a small community, we can actually easily replicate that. If you, me, I mean, if the six of us trade repeatedly and exchange things repeatedly, there is no need that we clear our reciprocal accounts at every point in time. As long as there is trust and there is stability and there is confidence that people will obey to the contract, all we have to do is to keep tabs. Right? In the old day, I remember when I was a kid, my mother had a libretto with every shopkeeper in town she would buy for. Vegetables, bread, meat, general store, and they would write down. She would send me, when I was say 6 or 7, I'll go buy that. I said, and the money, don't worry, tell him to write it down. And then at the end of the month, they would clear. In fact, in the typical working family in that day, cash was very interesting to see monetary policy. That's why, you probably didn't need checking account, because cash would go in one day and out within 3 days. Because you would get the salary and then pay all the dues for the month, pay, those that had to pay the rent, and there was really little bit left for the next 30 days, because almost all necessities were bought in this form of credit, and the credit were cleared at the end of the month. All right? And obviously we can do it in an interdependent way, and one way to do it in an interdependent way is to issue little IOUs to each other. It's Kocherla-Kota model of money, right? So, and to the extent we all use the same IOUs and we clear that, what I do is to carry around here, a light that says the checking account of Baldwin in our private money system of classroom 1 is minus 3,000 right now. That means, that I've received 3,000 more than I've given, and eventually I have to clear. Okay? All these ideas that are coming around of local monies are like that. Okay? They're like that. They are essentially credit system or IOUs, lending, borrowing, between participant firms and participants' families, but typically, in fact, they get restricted to participant firms, suppliers, and so on, that issue each other credit in some common thing. Now, why do they appear different than bilateral credit? They appear different from bilateral credit because there is a market maker. And in fact, I don't even want to enter into the legal issue that many have addressed. Who's there responsible? Who's actually lending to whom? Who's at trust? Who's giving the fideiussione? Right? There are market makers that says, look, it goes through me. So he buys from you, and you buy from her, and she buys from him, right? And you guys clear all these things with me, and I keep tab. And in some sense, there are circumstances in which I guarantee that you will pay her. And some other case in which it's actually very ambiguous, if I'm actually giving the guarantee that you pay her. Now think for a moment at what free banking was. Think at banks in the Far West. Right? You remember the movies? It's a little Far West town. There are about 50 ranches in the area, or 100 ranches. 3 blacksmiths, the artisan, the store, the general store, some cowboys, the brothel, the prostitute, the saloon, the sheriff. You know, the usual ingredients of a movie. Right? It's a close community, and they trade among each other. There is import-export. They export meat and wheat, puts on the train once a year, twice a year, right? And they import clothing stuff from the general store. Other than that, you know, the dog store, they all exchange services with each other. What is it the local bank does? The local bank, on one hand, takes care of the international trade of this community, right? It's the entity through which you pay the general store as an account, and the bank as a correspondent in Chicago or in St. Louis, better those days, right? It's a little town sitting in Arkansas, 1870, and they probably have a correspondent. The main branch is in St. Louis, that at the time is the financial center, right? And the bank, through the telegraph, says, you know, here's the clearing, I'll ship the money, the actual money of the general store to you with the next trade, all right? And then when, vice versa, when the farmers and the ranchers of the area sell their meat and stuff on the Chicago or St. Louis again, Mercantile Exchange, in fact again at that time 1870 St. Louis, they receive, the same bank ships the money back, right? And so if the community, you know, more or less runs, I don't know, if it runs a trade deficit, trade surplus, it probably goes up and down, right? That's it. The internal part is all through the bank. Why? Because the bank, everybody has a deposit at the bank, which consists essentially in a bookkeeping thing, and the bank gives them a book of checks, and these people write checks to each other. So I go to his saloon and I want 2 beers, and I'll write a check. I may use dollars, but I may write a check. You know, she goes over to buy meat, she writes a check, and so on. And they're all clear through the bank. So in taking the checks, he's issuing credit to you, and I'm guaranteeing that you have money in the account. All right? It's no difference. That's what it is. Okay? Better understand that. So in order to understand that, it's useful to understand what's the difference between a system like this and a system with a central bank. So this goes perfect for the lecture I want to give you today, because it's fantastic how policy debates, sometimes, if you think of them for a moment, are actually much easier to understand if you have studied the problem with a bit of logic. A typical statement also, which is completely analogous, that you hear these days at various levels, sometimes, unfortunately, even among people that are supposed to be serious, is that there is a dramatic difference between a loan that a commercial bank gives to you, say a mortgage loan or a business loan, and the central bank creating money by open market operation. First of all, notice in the common parlance, people don't understand that the central banks create money by open market operation. This is a dramatic problem. Central banks do not create money by fiat. I mean, they create money by fiat, but with a counterpart. The model of money by fiat, if you think, is actually the misleading model that we used the other day, Tuesday, of helicopter money. So we are actually responsible. Don Patinkin is responsible. Poor Don. Don was a fantastic guy. But unfortunately, if you take the model as a realistic description of reality, not as a model. Think about how the model I showed you the other day. I don't know if you went and read the book or at least read Stan Fisher's paper, okay? In that model, money is literally pieces of paper parachuted from an helicopter. They end up in your pocket and you didn't know you had them, right? They're magic. They're there, right? And with this money, you go around and buy all this stuff, right? It's really super fiat money. The funny thing is, it's not the way it works. It never worked like that. Never. Because it only works in two ways. Either as a taxing power of the sovereign. So yes, the sovereign at a certain point took coins or precious metal, debased it, that is, expropriated or appropriated of it in some mines, or by writing, or by saying, this mine in Potosi belongs to me, end of story. Then printed its face, or its symbol on a coin. The coin had a real value at the going price of gold of X, and they said, no, this is worth 2X. And then went around with that 2X and bought soldiers and horses and swords and cannons and waged a war. Or a castle or whatever. Right? That's what the royal did. So that was one way of putting the money into circulation. But notice that it was a tax, right? Because in exchange for the coin, I'll get the stuff. It's just a tax. And but the seigniorage, which is an ambiguous definition, is exactly that, or physically the percentage that were kept by the royal mint if you brought your private gold, private silver into the mint to be turned into coins. So you brought in an ounce, right? And they would take, 1%, 2% of the ounce for the royal, and then give you coins worth 0.98, 0.97, 0.99% of the total. So that's seigniorage. But the most easy way of seeing seigniorage is that. Why? Because it's completely analogous to the seigniorage you exercise when you increase money supply to create inflation. Okay? So that's one way. In modern banking, in modern central banking, we do it a slightly different way, which is less of an expropriation, which is, among other things, the reason why it's worth defending the fact that there is a separation between the entity that prints money and the treasury. Or to put it in other ways, that you cannot allow the treasury to print money. Okay? Otherwise, it's a pure tax. Imagine a treasury that prints money. Oh, so you read monetary statement. A treasury that prints money is a treasury that can purchase goods from the private sector legally, but in fact it's expropriating those goods. Right? It writes a check, there's nothing behind the check. In this case, the check, yes, is purely printed, gives it to you and says, come work for me. Gives it to you and says, give me your blue card. Gives it to you and says, I'll get your palace, okay? So, money created really by fiat, as people imagine, by a government. In the model, it's not created by the government. Notice that in the model of Patinkin, the helicopter money, there's no government. So it's really this really useful token that people find in their pocket and allows them to trade among each other, right? But if I put the government Then the government introduces money that directly controls money. That is, the treasury, the fiscal authority controls money. Then the fiscal authority is expropriating resources. Then it enters in the budget constraint as a tax. Right? Just think how you write down the budget constraint of that economy. Right? People produce in the private sector that much. That's the output of the country. Right? And here there is what? Here there is the private consumption of those people, the private investment of those people, and the public spending. Right? And the budget constraint of the public sector says this. Right? Where GT is current spending. Okay? Okay? A tax. Right? You can rewrite this as sorry. We can actually take away this. Okay? Completely equivalent. Okay? The public, in a model in which money is fiat, it's issued directly by the sovereign, and the sovereign puts it into the economy, makes it circulate by spending. It's a tax. Then you can come up with all your multiplier theories, but it's a tax. Okay? So that's one model of money, and it's actually the model of money that we have had in many countries for a long time. The sovereign created money like that. Right? I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to write down I send you those transparencies, right? I'm going to follow those transparencies and give you a brief model, historical model.
The slides?
Yeah, sorry, slides. Yeah, I'm an old-fashioned guy. I still call them transparencies. All right. All right, so that's one. But that's not actually how we do it. How do we do it? In the moment in which we separate the issuance of money from taxes and fiscal policy, we do it because we want to try, and I think there is a good argument, and it shows, to claim that at the end, the economist's effort, or the financial effort, even the legal effort, or the formal effort to separate central banking and the issuance of money from fiscal policy has de facto failed. Right? What we talked a lot in the 60s and 70s, thought we had accomplished, at least in the Western world, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, has come apart completely in the last 10 years. Right? Central banks have ended up with songs and dances, but have ended up obeying more or less directly to the sovereign. Nevertheless, we have kept a little bit of that separation. It's essential. When you create money, you withdraw securities. You withdraw securities. That is, what you do is you go to the private sector, you go to the bank and says, give me securities in exchange for that. So it's your choice to get more money or less money. It's a portfolio change. You may decide to keep the securities. They pay off for that. That's the process of creation of money. All right? So it's not true that it's pure fiat, because in the budget of the central bank, you have assets, you have liabilities, and you have net equity. Now, interestingly, some people have said, well, you know, what's the reason to have those equities? Central bank should not bother about equities. Why should I have equities, right? Should I have bonds here and other securities? Reserves, let's call it, just put very simple, and equities. This is positives, it's because the market value of what the central bank holds is larger than the liabilities of the central bank. The reserves are liabilities, right? If you have a reserve with me, you have the right to cash that, to use that.
So that's the central bank.
That's the central bank, typical, you know, super simplified budget constraint. I mean, budget constraint, sorry,